Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know, from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars, topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
GSMC Basketball Podcast, right here on the GSMC Podcast Network. It is your host back again to talk about everything basketball with you on this podcast today. Brice Lewis. Yes, sir. Back again to talk about everything happening in the world of basketball. As you know, finals ended about a solid week and a half ago, I would say almost 2 weeks now. And, you know, people are starting to have some basketball withdrawals after getting it. Really, we were spoiled after getting it day after day after day after day. Now we don't have it till at least next year. More than likely next year. Unless they decide to start on Christmas. So now we're entering that phase where they obviously the draft's the next big event to come up. And so at this point you're just going to hear more rumors about who's gearing up for free agency, what teams at the top of the draft are looking, who are they looking to select, potentially big trades on draft night, all of that. Because obviously you would think when it comes to draft picks, any big trade to potentially get a big player would have to happen before the draft, because you don't know what a team's draft picks unless it's a protected top 10, protected top 5 pick potentially. You don't know what the team's actual picks are going to be the next year or the next previous years or the next coming years, actually. So you're not going to necessarily go ahead, make a trade, not knowing if this team might be bad. Then you get a very high draft pick, and now you can't really use that. Because in the NBA, as you can tell through the draft picks, unless it's like top 5 really, are not that valuable, so to say, unless you're a rebuilding team. Outside of that, draft picks are very much the most things people care about a lot. It's just, we could just add a young player to the team, maybe add him to the G League system, maybe someone who could become a good bench role player. And eventually, sometimes you do get stars, obviously from a Donovan Mitchell and guys like that. So you really never know what's going to happen, but you know people don't look at it as seriously as maybe in the NFL or MLB or other sports. But today's show, we're going to talk about a lot of rumors from a lot of different teams. Obviously, big teams, Clippers, Lakers, Knicks, Rockets. All those teams have rumors continuously as they have. We're following storylines with each team. We're going to talk about just the Bucks. We're going to talk about the Bucks, obviously about Giannis and that situation, certain players potentially being on the move through free agency if certain things happen. We're going to discuss all that today on the podcast. Also, I'm going to bring up a question if the Warriors would still, or is it to be expected that the Warriors would trade Andrew Wiggins this offseason as well. But enough of that. We're going to go jump right into it. So like I was saying, the Milwaukee Bucks are in a very interesting decision, or at a very interesting point right now in the offseason. Their best player, Giannis, coming off 2 MVPs, coming off 2 number 1 seeds, but 2 disappointing playoff defeats. Obviously, the question will linger. Will Giannis stay or will he go? Well, now we have a report from ESPN that says that regardless of Giannis does not sign the Supermax extension, they will not trade Giannis to a team this offseason. They will keep him into the season and try to build a team and basically use next year as a prove it, as a show it year for Giannis, basically. They're basically saying we're going to put our chips in the basket and hope that we can show Giannis that we're willing to make money, we're willing to do what we have to do to put the best team around you, and we feel like we give you the best opportunity to win. It's a very bold move on Milwaukee's part, because obviously some teams would be nervous if their star doesn't sign, because it's like, is this them basically going ahead and saying he's going to probably leave? Because that's going to be a question. I've always said on this podcast that I think Giannis wants to stay. I think Giannis wants to be a part of Milwaukee. I really don't think he wants to leave, in my honest opinion. I don't think he wants to leave whatsoever. I think he wants to stay. He wants to be a part of that team. He wants to bring a championship to that city. But at the same time, Giannis also knows if they're not going to put the best team around me to potentially put me in position to do that, I have to weigh my options other places. Yes, we already know a lot of teams are gearing up just in case Giannis is. We all know about Golden State's injuries. We know about the Clippers. They said might even be in there. Miami Heat could be in there. The Knicks. A lot of teams are trying to dip their hand into the cookie jar and see if they can maybe get a chance at a Giannis. That's going to be the interesting thing. And then the thing with Milwaukee, too, is one of the biggest issues that they have when it comes to trading for players is that a lot of people feel like the Bucks outside of Giannis don't have a lot of tradable pieces. Because obviously one team they've been connected to has been Oklahoma City. But Oklahoma City is going through a rebuilding stage. They're going through a rebuilding process right now. Would they want to take on guys like a Chris Middleton potentially, or an Eric Bledsoe, or a Wesley Matthews, older veteran guys when they're trying to fulfill a younger rebuilding team? Would make no sense to trade an older veteran for other older. I mean, they're younger than Chris, but still like up there veterans, and do it that way, and then take on also money because obviously some of those guys are getting paid some good money, guys. So would Oklahoma City want to do something like that? Would that benefit them? Maybe they'd have to get a 3-team drill going. The Bucks are also eyeing Bogdanovich from the Kings. A lot of teams are eyeing him. Obviously, he's one of the top 3-and-D guys, one of the top 3-point shooters coming out in free agency this year. I believe he's a restricted free agent, actually. But a lot of people are viewing him maybe as a guy that the Bucks could go after. I mean, so obviously the Bucks are showing us through the signs and the signals that they are planning on really trying to formulate this team in a way where they know, hey, we got to make adjustments. We got to make changes. We can't leave the team the exact same. Because if we do, that's not going to be good enough potentially to keep Giannis. So we have to make roster adjustments. They are willing to pay luxury tax, which I've said also on this podcast multiple times. If you want to be a championship team, you have to pay in the luxury tax. It is very hard to field a championship team without doing that. Really, it's truly hard because you got to pay your top stars money, and then you got to still fill out the rest of the roster, and you give whoever how much money and go from there. I mean, that's pretty much how it's been created since LeBron really. When he went to the Heat, in the Pat Riley had to pay in so much luxury tax to have 3 stars plus everybody else on the roster. They won 2 chips, and I feel like from that point on, that established, hey, you got to make sure you're paying luxury tax to win championships. The Heat are really the only team that made it to the finals this year who wasn't in the luxury tax or as far as we know, wasn't too deep into the luxury tax. That if things went a certain way, maybe injuries didn't happen. If they won the championship, you can make that argument. Okay, the first team to ever win without maybe having to go deep into luxury tax. But you literally see, even LeBron knows. That's why every team he goes to, he's like, listen, if I come here, you got to pay luxury tax. We ain't winning if we ain't in the luxury tax. We can't have me and AD on super max deals and then this guy making $20 million, 15 and 10, and we ain't going to luxury tax. If we want good quality players after us as well. He understands that. The Bucks understand. Giannis said, listen, got to go into the luxury tax if we're going to win. And that's going to be important. You already know one of the positions they're trying to upgrade on Milwaukee is the point guard position. They're trying to move off Eric Bledsoe this offseason. They're trying to get an upgrade, more of a playmaking guard at that position. A lot of people aren't saying it, but I do think that they might entertain moving Chris Middleton if they can get a very good quality player Black in return. That is something I definitely could see happening. Even though, more likely than not, if I'm the Bucks, I need to try to see if I can find a really good point guard who I can make my second option and then put Chris Middleton as the third option. Because a lot of people feel like he's better as a third option anyway. So maybe that would work in terms of, okay, now Chris Middleton isn't the next guy. Whereas, like, if you can shut down Chris Middleton, the Bucks don't have many guys they can go to. You still got Chris Middleton, and then the other guy has to be the main objective to stop instead of Giannis and whoever the point guard is going into Middleton. So, as you could tell, the Bucks have a lot of interesting decisions. They've clearly made their stance. They're saying, listen, regardless of what happens, we are sticking to Giannis. We are going to keep him here, and we're going to just try what we can to keep him and say, hey, you should definitely stay here. And you should definitely want to be a part of this organization that we have and what we're building, that we've been building since you for the last 4 or 5 years, 6, 7 years. So the Bucks are in a very interesting dilemma right now. And they're aware of where they are. They understand where they stand right now. It we'll have to see what happens with Giannis. But so they're going to go ahead, stick with him, hope for the best, and go from there. Now I have some Knicks rumors from all my Knicks fans out there. I got to keep y'all up to date. I know y'all paying attention to what the Knicks are going to do. So I actually have some news on a former Knick that could return to New York. So, Carmelo Anthony is reported to have interest in returning to the Knicks. But under one condition. If Chris Paul is traded to the Knicks. If the Knicks can pull off a trade for Chris Paul, then Carmelo would gladly come back to the Knicks. So if I'm a Knicks fan, how does that make me feel? If I'm the Knicks front office, is that a move I'd want to make? You're bringing in 2 aging veterans who have played. And the thing about me saying that, there are 2 aging veterans who just came off 2 of their best years. 2 of them came off their best year last year. Chris Paul came off a great year last year. Carmelo came off a great year last year. Would you want to give up some stuff to bring these 2 guys in? If I'm the Knicks, it just depends on your expectations for this team. Do you want to trade some pieces away? Get Chris Paul. Then bring in Carmelo. You still got R.J. Barrett, I'm assuming, if you keep him. Maybe Mitchell Robinson as well. I mean, do you think that's going to make y'all a better team? Is this going to make you a playoff team? Is this going to make you a team that is going to be now competitive in the Eastern Conference? That's the question you have to ask yourself. People feel like Carmelo was in the best situation he can be in his career in Portland, being that third guy, a guy who can let Carmelo be Carmelo, and you still got Dame and CJ doing their thing. They felt like that situation is perfect for Carmelo. Are the Knicks in position to give him that same situation? Because if you're bringing him in there to be the main scorer or to be like the main guy, that's not really what Carmelo is at this career at this point, unless you're willing to play a certain style. If you're going to run the offense through him. Chris Paul, same way. Yeah, he can help the young guys, help them get better. But again, is this really going to field you a team that can get you to a championship? Because Chris Paul is still owed a lot of money. Are you willing to almost give up a max slot that you have in your cap for Chris Paul? Are you still willing to do that? That's going to be the question. If they're not willing to do it, then I don't think you make the deal. But if you are willing to do it, then I think you could go make that deal. If you think you could still get a starter, because you don't think the Knicks are trying to get in on the 2021 free agents class. So if they made that move, clearly they can't sign Melo to a lot of money, and then they'd have to hope, okay, Chris Paul, we got him on the books. Maybe if we need to, we can move him next year. If not, do we have enough money to still bring in another star? Maybe we can try to run a Carmelo, Chris Paul, and another star big three and see if maybe that can get us somewhere. Obviously, it's very unconventional. It's the Knicks. This isn't surprising they would be in that position, but it's something they might look at and kick the rocks on. But it just depends. But only way Carmelo would come back is if Chris Paul was there in a trade. And so if they're not making that trade, then I don't think Carmelo obviously will be coming back to the Knicks. But that's all the time we have here for this segment of the podcast. Coming up next, we have more team rumors and news in the NBA. So stay tuned right here on the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Football, basketball, and baseball are all back, and that means it's time to get down your bets. This is Brice Lewis here to tell you about my favorite sports book, and that's BetUS. I only endorse one sports book, and that's BetUS.com. Why you ask? BetUS is the pioneer in online betting with more than 25 years in the biz. You need a sports book with integrity and longevity, and you need to know that you're going to get paid. Live betting, MMA, golf, horses, esports, entertainment, and all kinds of crazy prop bets and futures. They have it all. Nobody in the industry gives bigger bonuses than BetUS. Go to betus.com now and fill out your information. It only takes a minute. When you get to how did you hear about us box, type in GSMC and you can get up to 150% in bonuses on your first deposit. Nobody beats that. I bet at BetUS, and so should you. Join BetUS today, and don't forget to type in GSMC and get up to 150% bonus on your first deposit. That's betus.com, America's favorite sportsbook.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we discussed the Bucks saying in reports that they will not trade Giannis, regardless if he decides not to sign the Supermax extension this offseason, and will try to field the best team around him and use next year as a show-it year if needed to keep Giannis in Milwaukee. Very bold move on Milwaukee's part, but they're clearly saying we're putting all of our chips on the table, and we won't allow him, if he does not sign the Supermax, to deter us from that goal. We're not going to give up and say, well, he didn't sign it, we got to get him out of here ASAP. They're like, we're going to try, and we're going to hope for the best. Now, we'll have to re-ask this question again at next year's trade deadline and see if maybe the Bucks aren't doing that good, or if something isn't working. Would they then think, okay, we might need to make this move now, which would be unprecedented to move a guy like Giannis in the middle of the season, but something potentially to look out for. We also discussed some Knicks rumors, which basically was one rumor, which was basically Carmelo could return to the Knicks if Chris Paul is traded there. Obviously, we know about Chris Paul and Carmelo's relationship off the court. They're really close friends. So if they were able to play on the same team in New York, that would be a great reunion for them. But only if the Knicks are willing to go out of the way to get Chris Paul, which we've heard rumors that they were considering, but we don't actually know if it's something that they want to actually do, which we'll find out when the offseason begins. Now, we're going to get into some more news and rumors. This time from your world champion Lakers. So, first, I have some news. So, do y'all remember when earlier in the season, right before the trade deadline, when everything was still normal, that the Lakers were interested in upgrading their guard position, and one guy they were targeting was Derrick Rose? Well, now with everything that has happened, there are rumors that a trade, according to a couple of general managers that have been spoken to by people, that a Derrick Rose trade to the Lakers is much more likely now. And so now it's creating some murmurings. People are getting a little excited thinking, okay, Derrick Rose could be a Laker this offseason. Obviously, that is a move that I think a lot of people want to see. People want Derrick Rose. He's one of those players that he had that, we all know about that fantastic, legendary start Derrick Rose had at the start of his career, and then how he got derailed by injuries, and then him and his journey to get back to where he is now, where he's a very good player still at this point in his career. He's still able to get you 16 a game, 18 a game if needed, and he can even have that big game. And so putting him on the Lakers would now put him on a championship team. Because while he's in Detroit, he won't be. So now he could be on a championship team. What is one thing that the Lakers may want to do is upgrade point. They want more scoring from the point. They're looking for a third option. Well, if just in case Rondo did decide to leave. Because really, even though Caruso's considered a point, I consider Caruso more of a two guard who can play point, in my opinion. So let's say Rondo decides to leave. You bring in a Derrick Rose. Derrick Rose is now instantly your third scorer on the Lakers with Anthony Davis and LeBron James. That would probably be one of the... And the thing about Derrick Rose, too, is he's learned at this point in his career to play off ball. Remember, before he was a very ball-dominant guard. Now that he's not the same Derrick Rose, he's learned to play more off ball. Especially playing with guys like LeBron AD will help him in this point in his career as well. Being an older player, but still able to produce. And so... I think when you get into the offseason, we talk about moves being made, you'll definitely hear some moves or some trades being talked about for the Lakers. Because we've heard about them maybe trying to get a Bradley Beal, a Victor Oladipo. They're looking at some guys that can come in and be that third guy. But even if they're able to get a guy like a Derrick Rose, that is completely fine. Derrick Rose, I think everybody would be happy if the Lakers made a move like that and think that move would be very effective for what they want to do. Because some people think the Lakers even have to come back with an even better team next year. And we would definitely think if they come back with Derrick Rose, the roster has definitely made an improvement from this year's roster, which just won a championship for them. And speaking of trades with the Lakers, they say that the market for Kyle Kuzma is heating up a little bit. Kyle Kuzma has been... A lot of people have basically... been souring on Kyle Kuzma, especially in Los Angeles. A lot of people have been even saying with the championship they won, he has to go. He has to be moved. We've seen Shannon Sharp on Undisputed say honestly, if they move Kuzma, I won't bat an eye. There's a lot of people who feel those same sentiments. A lot of people feel like Kyle Kuzma with this team just kind of doesn't fit. It's like he's there, but is it a good fit? Because he's going to play a very diminished role from what he wants to be. And sometimes he's very inconsistent and his basketball IQ is questioned. And to play with LeBron, you have to be smart. You have to always, think about what's the best move at the right time. And so, apparently the Lakers, I think, are going to look to move Kyle Kuzma this offseason. I think teams reportedly are interested in potentially acquiring Kyle Kuzma. Kyle Kuzma is a very young player, so he's a young piece. He's probably the most attractive trade piece that the Lakers even have. So if they make any trades this offseason, I would be 98% sure Kuzma will be part of that trade. And so, if they did trade for a Derrick Rose, they might have to throw Kuzma in that. Definitely, if they traded for a Bradley Beal or a Victor Oladipo, they'd have to throw him in there. And so, Kuzma could basically, even though he's leaving LA with a championship, could have played his last game in Los Angeles. He really could. He might not be with the Lakers next offseason because you're hearing just a lot of rumors about Kuzma potentially being on the move this offseason. And I think Kuzma might need a new start. I think he needs to be on the team where, with the way Kuzma plays, he's kind of an erratic guy. He's kind of like he tries to get his shots up. He's kind of a guy who views himself as a scoring guard. Sometimes needs to be better defensively. And like I said, sometimes make better decisions on the floor when it comes to the team basketball aspect of it. But is a guy who can have a big night. He is capable of being a big night. He's a guy who can score with the best. It's just being put in position. And obviously, like I said, with the Lakers, he went to the bench and he got less minutes. He was getting at max 20 minutes a game a lot of the time. So think about it. He was used to getting 30, 35 minutes a game the last couple of years, able to get his 16, 17 a game, 18 a game, whatever, have that occasional big game, and then goes to 20 minutes. When he had to get into that role, he was jacking up shots. If you were a Laker fan watching Kuzma, he was jacking shots up because he was just like, I'm still trying to get mine. Because Kuzma, you heard it. He's still trying to get him a good contract when his free agency comes up. And he knows currently in this role with the Lakers, he won't be able to get much of anything. Because as far as we know, you've been a role player for the last 2 years. And some people have even said if you're even good at that. Maybe because somebody knows that you may need to be used in a different environment, but that's not going to help you get paid when that time comes. So definitely, I think Kuzma may even want to make that move just for the betterment of his career moving forward. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on moving forward, going into the future with the Lakers, because Kuzma most definitely could be on the move this offseason. if the Lakers decide to make any trades for any players that are of a higher caliber. And then last rumor with the Lakers is Anthony Davis. So this is interesting just because of this. So apparently they say obviously Anthony Davis is going to become a free agent this offseason. He's going to opt out. So the perception is that, Anthony Davis is just going to sign a Supermax deal. Stay at Lakers for 4 or 5 years. Be the guy after LeBron leaves. Whatever. Well, now we have a very interesting report coming out that says that actually Anthony Davis might just sign a 2-year deal with a player option in his second year. Now, before we start making quick accusations, here's the thing. That means if he signed that deal, he would play this year out and then could opt out with LeBron. That means he could still opt out with LeBron James next year. But also another reason why is we forget, with COVID-19, there isn't as much money that teams are going to have this offseason, which could affect certain players getting paid as much as they want. So he could be also doing that to see where the money is next year and then try to cash out. Because here's also another thing you have to understand, which this is also not a shock to anybody. Since he was traded to the Lakers this year, he can still get a lot of money. But if he stays another year, does another year, he can get even more money next year. And so I don't look at this as he's doing this to leave LA, but it does raise an interesting question. That would be a very nervous period of time if I'm the Lakers. If LeBron opts out, AD opts out, if you're not, and you might be more willing to get more of a commitment from AD to come back, but we don't know if LeBron is necessarily going to come back. Because even though people haven't discussed it yet, we don't know what LeBron is thinking. In my opinion, I think he's probably going to stay in Los Angeles. I mean, there just isn't a team right now that you would think he would want to go to outside of Los Angeles. Because even when he was with Cleveland, you always said, the Heat. Or, this team. Or, like, when he left Cleveland the second time, we all knew the Lakers were a team eyeing him. But there's really no team right now that you would think LeBron would want to go to outside of where he is now, especially with a championship, especially if they win another championship next year, where Anthony Davis is the same way to me. Is it possible that if LeBron decided to leave, that AD maybe says, you know what, do I really want to be by myself on this Laker team with a team that may not be in position to compete for championships anymore if LeBron leaves, and I would be in the exact same situation I was in New Orleans? That's always a possibility, because we always know when LeBron leaves organizations, they're not always in the best shape when that happens. So maybe AD's keeping that under account as well. Because some people still hold out hope that he may consider going to his hometown team, Chicago Bulls. We don't know if that's something that could be in the cards down the line for Anthony Davis. So all that could be, tied together. But currently through the report, it's just because of the COVID-19 and trying to see what the money's looking like next year, since there won't be as much this year. And there's expected to be a higher percentage of money that the league will have next year, which means he can get paid more next year as well. But I just threw all that extra stuff in there for that speculation, because, we got to speculate that these are some potential routes Anthony Davis could be looking at. What is LeBron doing? Maybe let's see where the Bulls are in a year. Let's see what the money looks like in a year. Am I comfortable coming back to Los Angeles without a star? All those things are under consideration. And that may be another reason why the Lakers could be trying to make a move for a third legitimate star. Because if LeBron left, if they could keep that other star, it's AD and that star, even if LeBron isn't there. So it's not like they're all of a sudden a team that has no talent. They still have another guy they can play with, still be a competitive team, be in the playoffs, and see what happens with AD as the main guy. So just I guess, food for thought. But coming up next, we're going to get to some more rumors, news. And would the Warriors still trade Andrew Wiggins this offseason? All that right here on the podcast.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment we discussed Lakers news and rumors, basically, for all my Laker fans out there and anybody just a fan of basketball. Intrigue what's going to happen with Anthony Davis. Obviously, we discussed him potentially planning to sign a 2-year deal because of COVID, the money, but also potentially through it, maybe could he be looking to leave just in case LeBron leaves, since that means that would put them as a free agent in the same year with player options. So just all of that. We also discussed Kyle Kuzma potentially being on the move, a guy that a lot of Laker fans seem to have soured on. So obviously that's something that could potentially happen. That's a move that could potentially be made. But Kyle Kuzma potentially on the move in LA. And then also we discussed D Rose potentially being a part of the Lakers, as GMs around the league think a trade to the Lakers is much more likely now with everything that's happened. So could potentially D Rose join up with LeBron James and Anthony Davis this offseason? We'll have to find out and see, as people are starting to talk or say maybe, hey, that could potentially happen. So we'll have to keep an eye on all of that. But now on to some more news to the other California teams. And we'll start with Golden State. So this is just something for me where, remember when the Warriors traded D'Angelo Russell and got Andrew Wiggins back, right? And a lot of people were saying that the reason why they made that trade was because they're planning on potentially deciding to go ahead and use Andrew Wiggins as potential trade bait if they were able to maybe get a Giannis or a star to come to Golden State. Because then you could say we have a young, some people would consider a all-star-ish player in Andrew Wiggins, and we can offer that up plus a top 2 draft pick and think that's pretty good compensation for a star, plus some extra, maybe some picks, maybe some extra players. And now we haven't heard as much about it, but even if they don't get a guy like a Giannis, could the Warriors still trade for a guy like, I don't know, maybe an Embiid, maybe, potentially, just throwing a name out there, just another star player in general? And would Andrew Wiggins still be at the center of it? Because remember, a lot of people figured when they got D'Angelo Russell, people were saying D'Angelo Russell really wasn't a part of their long-term plans. He was just there to potentially use as trade bait for a potential star to get later. And then obviously they made that trade and got Andrew Wiggins. So now he's in that position where now could he be potentially trade bait? Now, with the Warriors coming back as a whole, with Curry, Clay, Draymond, Wiggins, they seem like, let's say they drafted a guy like Wiseman. Let's just say they drafted a guy like him. I mean, that's a pretty good starting 5, you would think. Like, that's a pretty decent, good starting 5. Like, that, remember, just Draymond, Steph, and Clay alone has made it to the finals multiple times in the Western Conference. But obviously we understand the Western Conference is better. We understand this isn't the same Western Conference that was basically playing when Golden State was winning. And obviously, I think Golden State sees that. That's why they're trying to see if potentially could we go out there and get another star to bring in. And so, are they going to maybe try to actively move a guy like Andrew Wiggins? That's going to be probably the big question right now. Or are they content with, hey, if we can't get who we want to get, we are okay with keeping him? Because one thing I'm also looking at as well is Wiggins is still currently on a big deal. Curry's on a big deal. Clay's on a big deal. What if the Warriors wanted to be players in next year's free agency? They would still probably, for the benefit, need to probably try to move Wiggins to do that. So that's just like another, bone to throw in there and say, okay, so then is that maybe potentially a priority for the Warriors this offseason to move off Andrew Wiggins? Like that really could be something there. And so it's really something we have to look at. It's really something we have to see if the Warriors would do. I feel like if I'm the Warriors, I definitely entertain it. And then the thing is, if you were going to move Andrew Wiggins just to free up money, you would still need a pretty good return back for him. Because you don't want to feel like you're just giving away a guy like Andrew Wiggins, a talent like Andrew Wiggins, for money. So I'm sure if I'm the Warriors, if I maybe made a trade like that, I'd probably try to maybe get back maybe some guys on expiring deals. That obviously is a really popular thing to do. Free up some money, get guys on expiring deals, knowing, okay, they'll be off the books, so we just got this money off the books, and then they'll be off the books, and we'll know we'll have the money when that time comes to go after the guy that we want. I don't think at this point, especially when you're a championship-focused team, draft picks are that big, so you're not going to trade them for draft picks, really. Because clearly, the Warriors are open to trading that number 2 draft pick again if a star is involved. So maybe that's something potentially that could happen. There's a lot of senses of possibilities, with what's going on right now. And so we'll have to see where the Warriors are when that time kind of comes around for them. Because they have to make that decision on, hey, what do we do? And then we haven't even talked about Draymond. Y'all forget that Draymond Green is a free agent as well. So with him being a free agent as well, how much do you bring Draymond back on? Nobody's thinking Draymond's going to walk, but I mean, you can't really give Draymond a max deal. So that's also something that you have to look at if you're the Golden State Warriors. What do we do with Draymond Green? How much do we bring him back for? All of that is a question that Golden State has to answer. And so we got to see what happens. But now we're going to continue on with more rumors. Well, not rumors, but reports from the Clippers. Obviously, the fallout. We got more following out. And so, obviously, we know when the Clippers signed Kawhi Leonard, brought in Paul George. One thing we knew about was that Kawhi had a lot of perks in Toronto. And he had a lot of perks in Los Angeles as well. He could sit out games if he wanted, not practice if he didn't want, and in the report says he was also late to meetings. And so obviously the report says it rubbed a lot of players the wrong way. We've been hearing that all season, that the perks and basically the advantages, the rights that Kawhi was getting rubbed some players from previous years. Mainly the main players they've talked about were Patrick Beverley, Montrezl Harrell, Lou Williams, the wrong way. And, Lou Williams came out and he said, hey, I deny this report. This isn't true. But clearly there was an issue in that locker room that the star players were basically able to have their way, and nobody said anything. Doc Rivers never corrected them. And that's why a lot of people feel like with Lou Williams being added and coming in, a lot of people think all of that will be rectified. A lot of people think Lou Williams won't. Ty Lue. I don't know why I said Lou. Ty Lue, my bad. Ty Lue will come in and rectify some of these issues. And Ty Lue will come in here and say, hey, Kawhi, you need to practice with the team. Hey, Kawhi, if you ain't hurt, you need to play tonight for the betterment of the team. And then Ty Lue could go back and say, look what happened last year when we did all this. We can't do this exact same thing this year if we're trying to win a championship. So it just shows you. You don't want to go as far as to say the locker room was fractured in any type of way. But you can clearly tell the locker room was affected by these decisions, by these, like they say, perks that their star players were able to get. And so that obviously is a big issue for any team. Because, think about it. The Clippers team before Kawhi and them got there, hard work, brought their lunch pail to work every day, knowing they were going to grind it out, fight you, dog you to the end, regardless if they win and lose. And then this team came in, and now all of a sudden, who cares about the regular season, whatever, this whole old management. It just seemed like a different vibe just after adding two guys. And maybe, like I said, it did rub players the wrong way. So, clearly, if they can fix that issue, and that issue has been resolved, then the Clippers will be in a much more better mental space as a team if that's not the case. I still say to this day that I personally somewhat feel like they didn't actually even need to trade for Paul George. I feel like they could have kept literally the roster they had last year and just added Kawhi Leonard to it, and they would have been just as successful. To me, because you would have still had that same dog, that same mentality that the Clippers had. You still could have added guys like a Marcus Morris if you wanted. You still could have did that. Just had an extremely deep team with really good players all around. Lou Williams could have been your second option if you needed one. And then you still had Kawhi, who just had to be Kawhi because he did it with the Raptors. Why couldn't he do it with the Clippers? Because honestly, you could make an argument in the playoffs as Paul George hurt the team more than he helped the team. Paul George was actually worse than as he should have been. And they were still competing in all those games when Paul George was not good at all. So it's not like he was needed. Obviously, if he played well, there probably would be no chance. But, hey, I'm just saying, the team definitely would have been in a different headspace if maybe that was the case. And so on and so forth. So definitely interesting to continue to hear some of those leak out reports about how players were feeling during the season with the Clippers, with everything that's happened, and, just seeing how it may have affected the team over time. So definitely something to keep an eye on. If you're the Clipper fans, how many more stories could potentially come out? Could we hear something that was potentially bad? I'm sure Ty Lue is going to try to, knot all that up and just, get that taken care of as soon as possible. Ty Lue is a no-nonsense head coach, and I expect him to be able to handle things because I do also feel like he is the right guy for this job. He's seen everything that's happened, and he knows what needs to be fixed in Clipper Town. But that's all the time we have here for this segment of the podcast. Coming up next, we're going to get into more NBA news discussions. So if you want to stay tuned for all of that, keep it right here on the GSMC Basketball Podcast.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment we discussed some Clipper rumors. Obviously, reports that Kawhi Leonard's preferential treatment rubbed a couple of players the wrong way within the Clippers organization. We've heard that about that earlier. We've heard that about Paul George. We've heard that multiple times. This is more a direct report on Kawhi and how players felt. Obviously, the three main players that people report that were bothered: Montrez, Lou Williams, Patrick Beverley, which Lou Williams went on to then come out and say he was not actually bothered by it and that the report is false. But we've been hearing it all offseason, so there has to be some type of validity to the report. We also discussed the Warriors. Would they still trade for, or would they still trade away Andrew Wiggins this offseason, regardless if they can't land a Giannis? Because would they potentially be trying to set themselves up for 2021, where then they would have to get Wiggins' books number off the books? You're already paying Draymond almost $25 million a year. You're already paying Clay and Steph the max. You can't really have Andrew on the books and then think you can get another star. So is that something they would still attempt to do? Maybe not even just the offseason, but even during the season as well. Those are all something that could potentially be the case that they could look into. So we discussed that as well. But now we're going to get into some more rumors. And so now, obviously, I've discussed on this podcast before that Russell Westbrook could potentially be on the move. The team we've talked about him being on the move to is the Knicks, because that is a team that continuously gets reports that the Knicks are definitely looking at maybe adding a Russell Westbrook. And now there's a report from the Houston saying that the Rockets are much more likelier to move off of Russell Westbrook now that Daryl Morey has left. So that basically means probably whoever they bring in, whoever is running that part of the organization right now, they're saying, hey, we're probably now higher probability we're going to move off of Russell. So Russell could be on his next team, his third team in 3 years. Oklahoma City, Houston, and now a new team. And so now, obviously, the question for the Houston Rockets is, what would you want back? Obviously, we discussed on the last episode, Houston has interest in Joel Embiid, and that everybody on the roster is touchable but James Harden. So, obviously, that's an easy team to say, hey, you give up an all-star point guard for an all-star big man. Both teams have needs they need to be filled. Literally, the 76ers could pluck a Russell and then get shooters, too, to go with Ben Simmons. And then the Houston gets their star big man to go with James Harden. Shoot, if you wanted to, you could even have a 3-team deal potentially in there. If maybe 76ers didn't want Russell, like, hey, we just need somebody to take Russell. You know, but we also still need a conversation from you too to make it worth the trade. So, just all of that is in the books, I would say, for Russell. What other teams could potentially be in the Russell Westbrook sweepstakes? And really the thing with that is that how many teams want a guy like Russell Westbrook? So we've talked about the Knicks. We've talked about the Sixers potentially. Who else maybe is a team that might be willing to take a flyer on a Russell Westbrook? Obviously, I would think teams that need that box office. Because I even made the case with the Knicks. That's more of a box office move than a good basketball decision. Because Russell Westbrook's going to get butts in seats. People are going to come to see Russell Westbrook play. So if you trade for Russell Westbrook, you're going to get people to come and say, hey, You want to go to that game tonight? Russell's playing. But in terms of a good basketball decision, what team maybe would be willing to take a flyer on Russell Westbrook? And that's where you kind of have your questions. Like, who? You don't really look at any of the top contenders and think, Heat? Probably not. Nuggets? No, Jamal Murray. Lakers? They need a point guard, but they clearly don't want to bring in a guy who they know their weakness is just they can't shoot. Clippers? Nah, I don't see that being the case at all. Who else? The Bucks? Maybe, but Russell and Giannis, if you think about it, kind of have the same game. They're not really great shooters. So they have to get into the paint to score their points. And obviously Giannis is a bigger, dominant player, so he can dominate more in the post than Russell can. Russell's a guard, so all you got to do really is just make sure you can't get into the paint like Giannis and make him take J's, and he's basically not as effective. I think, like I said, since they play the same way, it wouldn't work, so I don't think Milwaukee. Boston, no. I think they're going to stick with Kemba Walker. Raptors, maybe, especially if Fred VanVleet leaves. They could bring Russell in there, but I don't know if the way the Raptors are and how they want their team with Nick Nurse, I don't know if they would feel like, again, would that be a good basketball decision? Because Russell Westbrook and Fred VanVleet are two different types of players to me. You still got Kyle Lowry there. I mean, if you wanted, if you really felt like if you're the Raptors to stay relevant and to stay competitive in the Eastern Conference, you needed another star, and the best guy you could potentially get was a Russell Westbrook. You got him, pair him with Lowry, Siakam. You know, maybe if Ibaka comes back, Ibaka. I mean, on paper, you would still expect them to maybe be a playoff team, but I don't know if that would fit in terms of the whole team dynamic. I don't know if that would fit in terms of what they would want to do in Toronto. So that's why I'd be a little questioned. It would be questionable for me to think they maybe would go after a Russell Westbrook. Anybody else missing Golden State? No. You know, like I said, some of the top contending teams, you really don't see him going to any of those teams. So it's going to be a big question. Probably the 76ers and the Knicks are Russell Westbrook's two best places to be traded. If the Houston's brass does actually move off of Russell, those would probably be the two most likely places Russell Westbrook could go. And then other trade rumors for another point guard, Chris Paul. There are reports that Chris Paul is looking to be traded to a contender, which is not surprising with where he is in his career. So now we're going to have to do the same thing like we just did with Russell, with Chris. Now, we've already heard rumors that potentially the Bucks might want to look into that kind of trade because they are looking for a Chris Paul-esque point guard who can get his own shot, can make plays for other players, is a playmaking guard, and then Giannis can do his thing. I think that would be a pretty good combination, and he could also teach Giannis a few things about how to win in this league and the other guys on the team. So for me, I definitely see that as a potential place. We just don't know if the Bucks have what the Oklahoma City Thunder would want to actually give them Chris Paul. Obviously, we've heard him connected to the Knicks. The Knicks aren't a championship team, though. But they probably would be willing to give up some things for him. But again, I don't know, with him going to Oklahoma City and then going to the Knicks, knowing how the Knicks franchise has been, Chris Paul could be in for a losing season. Because the Knicks franchise, we know how dysfunctional they are, and we can't sit here and just say, yeah, we know they're going to be good this time. So that may be a move that he doesn't want to make. Like I said, Lakers. That's been a move that some people think maybe the Lakers would make. Chris Paul, LeBron James, good friends off the court, like I've said with Melo. People think that they would be okay playing with each other. He's a playmaking guard. Because especially, again, if you lose Rondo, you're going to need a playmaking guard like Rondo. And the thing is, Chris Paul can do exactly what Rondo does, except he's a better scorer. So that would actually not be a bad move to actually make if they wanted to do that. So definitely to me, that is a place that Chris Paul could go. So we got the Bucks so far. 76ers, probably not, because him and Ben Simmons are kind of the same type of playmaking guard. Obviously, Chris Paul can shoot, but I don't know if they want to bring in an older guy like that with Ben. The Heat, no, even though you may say he's an upgrade over Goran Dragic, but no, I don't think the Heat would want to spend money on an older guy like that, especially since they're trying to gear up for the free agency class of next year. Golden State, probably not. Again, Curry's there. Not really. Denver, not really. Clippers, you would think no. You because remember they gave they probably are past that. They probably like probably want to bring him back. For the most part, the most teams that you would think he would go to in terms of contenders were the Bucks and Lakers. Those seem like the two contending teams potentially. He's not going back to Houston, so that's not happening. So those are probably, again, the two contending teams that he could go to. And then the Knicks are another team that he could go to if they wanted to try to break him just to wherever they could go. So obviously, that also is a potential place for them. So we'll have to see what happens with Chris Paul this offseason. And if maybe it happens. So we'll have to see. But we're going to get to the quick story before we get out of here. The 76ers reportedly have been criticized by NBA insider Jabari Young of CNBC. Said that the 76ers were unorganized before hiring Doc Rivers as team's new head coach. He said that the 76ers had too many front office employees with undefined roles and struggled to focus on the road. And so, basically, he's basically saying in the article, they basically were very unorganized during this entire process of looking for their next head coach. And that they really went after Doc because he's a big name. And obviously, and it makes you feel like, oh, well, Doc wouldn't want to come to an organization that isn't well run. It isn't organized. But they say, hey, they weren't organized before they hired Doc. They said that move wasn't really the best move. And we'll have to see what happens. So the 76ers, obviously, that's not good hearing that your team seems to still be a little bit in shambles before hiring your new head coach. Where, again, a lot of people wonder even if that was even a good move for the Sixers. A lot of people are wondering, is Doc Rivers the right coach for this situation? Did the 76ers hire him because they really felt like he was the best man for the job? Or did they hire him because he's the biggest name on the market that brings the most value? Those are questions that people have about this deal that they made with Doc. And obviously we'll have to see what happens going into the season. We'll have to see how this offseason plays out with the roster. I'm sure if, like I said, Embiid was on the trade market, he would be a big cog in terms of, okay, do we feel like this is good enough for you? If we were to trade Embiid, would you be able to work with what we're getting back in return and be able to make a winner out of this team? I'm sure all of that's going to be discussed when talked about. So we'll have to see how it all looks when it's all said and done, but we'll keep an eye on the 76ers, obviously. I'm sure we'll hear more things about what they're doing throughout the offseason coming up. But that's all the time we have here on the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Thank you for tuning in once again. Thank you for being a part of the show, letting me be part of your day. Don't forget to follow us on social media at GSMC_basketball on Twitter. Also, don't forget to leave us a review or subscribe. We definitely appreciate it. And we're going to be back Tuesday with more basketball up-to-date news and everything of the sort. So this is your host, Brice, signing out, saying have a good day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.